Hello, and welcome back to the Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran developers discuss formative games in depth. We've lately been discussing Hitman 2 Silent Assassin, the 2002 IO Interactive game. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined each week by my co-host, a man who doesn't look even a day older than his 75 years.
Tim Longo.
Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Good.
Why don't you jump in and introduce our audience to this week's guest?
Yes, I am excited to introduce the audience to Janos Flösser, who is a good friend of mine, old friend, and we worked together at Square Enix on Tomb Raider stuff while he was the chief creative officer over there at Square Enix Europe. He also is the ex-managing director and probably various other roles at IO Interactive, and I believe one of the founding members of the studio, if I'm not mistaken, but he can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so welcome, Janos.
Thank you very much, team. Thank you very much, Brett, for having me.
Yes, it's very exciting. So, I mean, what can you clue us into some of your history coming out of, you're not working for IO or for Square right now, but when you were, so what was your kind of history throughout sort of the games industry back in the day?
Sure. So I started in the game industry in '98. I guess this is slightly after you started. You started a couple of years earlier. We started in establishing IO Interactive actually in Copenhagen. It's a Copenhagen-based studio. I was the first managing director for the group. We were 7 guys starting it. Cool. Before that, I was doing movies and television at Nordisk Film, so it was quite a change for me. I've been playing games over time, but I didn't, produce games as such, so this was kind of all from scratch. These 7 other guys or 6 other guys, 5 of them, they were from what you call the demo scene in Scandinavia, mainly in Denmark. Programmers as well as artists, been working on quite a few Atari games in the US, came back to Copenhagen in '98 and looked for me. We knew each other from previous encounters and asked if I could help them establish IO Interactive as a studio. At that point, I went to my boss saying that basically I believe in investing in talent, and these guys were massively talented. So I saw some opportunities, and we got this task from Nordisk Film proving that we were right. So they invested a small amount of money in a prototype, and this is how things worked back in '98, starting with a prototype and an idea, then looking for a publishing deal. And a publishing deal, it was kind of advanced royalties back then. So developers got some money from a risk-willing publisher to further exploit the concept. And at some point, there was a contract between us, a long-form contract, and based on that, you could start working. So the Nordisk Film basically asked us to prove the concept by presenting it to international publishers, and if any publisher showed interest to picking up the concept, they will join in a company structure. So we spent. Sorry.
Yeah. So did that initial prototype? I mean, how much of Hitman would we recognize in that initial prototype?
So you recognize a bold man walking very straight up, and
so the character came first.
The character was there from the very beginning. Yeah, we discussed different concepts, and we had a great artist with us. I think Tim knows him very well, Rasmus Kjær.
Rasmus, yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching him and his career even since he went to the Danish School of Design. He was studying art and visual communication. I was censoring at the design school, and I thought if there was ever one guy I will hire, that would be him, which I did actually.
It was a good hire.
It was a great hire, definitely. And we've been working together ever since, actually, until for a couple of years ago, we've been working together. So it was more than just a working relation. It was a very deep friendship, actually. But we decided to create this slightly controversial character, an anti-hero type of character. And I wrote the very first synopsis for this game. It was very easy, very, straightforward story. It's a patricide story, as you know. So
right.
This is a bunch of fathers creating this, kind of a monster. It's. I think you've been mentioning Frankenstein. I don't think Frankenstein was the inspiration for this story. I think it's more like the Icarus. No, it was the Icarus myth.
Interesting.
Was the inspiration.
Cool. I never knew that. That's
it's kind of, you shouldn't, we humans, we tend to mess up everything. If we build submarines, they never submerge. We build aeroplanes, they fall out of the sky, but we keep going. And finally, there was this discussion back then in late 90s about cloning. And I think there was a Chinese company. They've been seriously talking about creating a subhuman race, genetically engineer a subhuman race as a workforce. And I think it was so infamous, So we thought this was kind of a great story. So what about you break that commandment? You shouldn't recreate God's image on earth, and someone does that. And this person turns against them. So it becomes a patricide story. This was kind of the basic of it. And we thought it was kind of far out at the time. But if you look at what we're cloning today and how far we got, I think reality is catching up on Hitman, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really wild. Icarus, huh? I would not have reached for that. It would have been a deep, deep cut for me.
No.
That's terrific.
Yeah, we've been talking about, already then we've been talking about what you call techno-anthropology. So this is the effect of technology on cultures and vice versa. And it's a very hot topic today. It wasn't that hot topic back then. So it felt kind of stretched. It felt a bit strange. It felt a bit awkward, but I thought it came very well through. And because of the background of the guy, you could go further than you could in politically correct computer games. So we thought it was a super subject.
Well, it is. I mean, it's such... I mean, obviously, you listened to the episodes while we were playing, and we brought up various times sort of the canon of the series and kind of the background of it all. And and there's a lot of crazy concepts in there that I know we've talked about in the past when we were working together and stuff. And it's such the Icarus myth is an interesting thing that you and I had never talked about. So that's a new piece of information that's super cool. But also, Brett and I talked a few times about kind of almost the tone of the game, and there's a lot of kind of almost weird and unexpected themes in there that you just weren't finding in games at that time.
I mean, this is
like
not
you said,
James Bond. It's like John le Carré instead, right? It's that sadder, life, feel.
If you look at some of the themes, you look at the sanatorium. Well, my background is from Eastern Europe, and I grew up under a communist regime. It was quite an experience, I tell you that. And some of the neighboring regimes were even worse than the country I grew up in. So you look at Ceaucescu's Romania, and you realize that this guy, he actually chased down orphans and trained them for his Securitate, his police force. This is what he did, because the types you train the best is the types without any love or any parents or any influence from ties that matter. And I thought the other guy, Ortmeyer, this is actually a guy I knew in Hungary, so I stole the name, changed it slightly. But I thought the person was so devilish. I wanted him in a computer game and shoot him over and over again, you know. So he ended up in Hitman, and in real life he was a psychiatrist. But as you know, the regime used psychiatry to mistreat dissidents, you know. So people who had a different perception of what is right and what is wrong, or had a voice or tried to have a voice. So he came into this story and he got killed for it. So I kind of, it's a great satisfaction, to be honest. I know it's super childish as such, but I actually love the fact that I can shoot him in the face, you know. So it's many of these things influenced our discussions and the development of the character. And Rasmus wanted to create this very, very iconic character. And we had deep discussions about iconic design, what makes it. And there was this discussion about the old, 50s Coca-Cola bottle, you know. If you came across, hurting your feet in the sand on the beach, and it turns out to be a piece of a shred of that bottle, you will still recognize it's a Coke, right? Because it has such a strong reference. And the great design, I think, I'm from this design nation, Denmark, now, you know, and we look at design as something that improves life and processes. So great design, it's something you can break and it's still very functional and recognizable. So it's very iconic. And then he said, in order to make this guy iconic, I need to, make him significant in ways that makes him very recognizable, and also in behavior we need to make him very recognizable. So it was about his looks and feel, and it was about his mannerism and what he does, and that was the early starting point, creating the character.
So, yeah, it's really wild to me to think of the game starting from that kind of standpoint of how can we make this most iconic character, which is a great way to start. I mean, it's something that Tim Schafer does in a very different styles of games, but he does the same sort of thing. And he also borrows from life. You know, I know, characters that he has had in, like, Dave the Tentacle, were based on people he knew, roommates and whatever, this roadie character, was somebody that he knew, and even going into, like, Brütal Lëgend. That's really interesting to me that's where you started. I would have thought you would have started on the other end, which was, okay, you're going to be a hitman, and working on the machinery of that first. That's really interesting.
Well, sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask on, piggybacking off of Brett's question there. So, when does the hitman part come into Agent 47? If you did start with a character, or was it kind of both at the same time?
So we had a number of options, and the hitman character came in very early, or an assassin character came in very early. And the one reason is an early discussion. I think it was between some of us on the artistical side of the group we were, and one of the artists, one of the founders and artists, Jesper Vorsholt, Jørgensen, he said, so what about a hitman, and we also, it was a great suggestion. Probably no publisher will ever publish it at that point, And then we had this discussion about what makes stories matter. And basically, working with movies and television, I realized if you frame a face, in front of the camera, and this face tells you a story, and a story takes you 10 minutes, and you're still sitting there after 10 minutes, it was a story worth listening to. And then I tried to analyze what type of stories we do like, and we went kind of the opposite, what type of stories we do hate. And these are stories without conflicts in it, flat, boring stories without conflicts and politically correct shit. I don't read that because it bores me out. So we thought, okay, so the ultimate conflict between humans you can face. is taking another person's life. And, Shakespeare proves it to you. You take MacBeth, it's 145 pages, and you have a kill on each page, some pages more than one, so, and it's still working after 500 years. So it's not a new thing. And you stand up for something, you believe in something, and Hitman is a very controversial character. He's your way to justice in many ways. And we thought it will be great because you can break it up episodic, so you can have one level, even independent from the previous level. Obviously, you want to tie these together so the levels make sense, the story makes sense to you. But we wanted to create something that goes epic, something that you could build on. Maybe at some point even create a movie or a series of, television or whatever, novels. Much of it came through, not on kind of the level I wanted, but it happened. And the game definitely, good and bad, I think it's one of the most iconic games I ever played, and I still enjoy playing them. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that Hitman 2, having not played the series at all before, I was a little bit worried, and definitely at the beginning I still was bouncing off of it a little bit because, of course, design standards have kind of moved on in the last, 15 years.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit difficult to get into the water. But once I kind of got my head around it, I really started to really get enmeshed in how the levels were constructed, at its best. I mean, there are just moments where you feel like you're that guy, and it's interesting to be so character forward. Because I think that's what I keyed into is like, I'm this cool, collected, I never sweat kind of character. I walk everywhere, even though it's the pacing is a little slow, by today's standards. It emphasizes that sort of central character, this is a guy who's going to go do this job, and he's unstoppable. He's the Terminator in some ways.
Yeah, I kind of look at these things, from a more, how to say, academic approach sometimes, because there are a lot of people who's been researching and investigating storytelling and play. Also how people they play games. There's a great book by Johan Huizinga. He's a Dutch guy. It Homo Ludens. The playing man, and he frames kind of the rules of play, and we wanted to observe that. Some of it we missed out. The multiplayer Hitman, not at that point. That wasn't the focus for us in '98. But definitely the fact that gaming should be voluntary and is voluntary at its best, the fact that you create something outside ordinary life. You can be a hitman or a Tomb Raider, you can be an astronaut, you can be whatever, and you can live out that fantasy. And also the social context, even if it's a single player game for the first iterations. I mean, there's a huge social network around the game. I think it's one of the socially most hot games in Square Enix world. It's more than 6 million fans out there, so on Facebook. So it's quite a lot. People are interested in the character and what it does.
Yeah, to Brett's point earlier in what you were saying there, Janos, that it's one of the there are a lot of characters in games that are merged with genres because the genre, we already kind of know the existing genre that they are going to be combined with, whether it's a space marine and a shooter, and those two things tend to go together well. For Hitman, he's a very unique, interesting, different character, and as Brett was saying earlier, what he does and the way he carries himself and even the mechanics of the game, for me at least, they've always meshed together really well, and they're kind of in an unexpected combination. And Can you talk a little bit about, so you've talked about character as the genesis of the franchise for you and Agent 47. How did the gameplay creep into that and become kind of a combo? Like, even like Brett mentioned, the choices where walking was going to be, the core moment to moment movement versus running or versus things that other games were doing. That, and at the time, many other games were all about speed, and going fast and shooting fast and doing all. And Hitman, in so many ways, is the opposite, especially in 2002 and 2000.
Yeah, I think we called it the thinking man's shooter at the time. We wanted to create an environment where you could actually have ultimate freedom, being limited obviously by processor power and whatnot. I mean, you look at the first Hitman game, I think the most powerful computer you had, it was a 200 megahertz Pentium 2 processor, I mean, nevertheless, we managed to fit the game into it and gave much more freedom than many other games did at the time. So it was kind of groundbreaking in a concept and groundbreaking in technologies of its time. I think the only game tried to do the same was Max Payne, done by Remedy in Finland, and they were the competition we've been watching at the time. There wasn't that many other games we've been watching in 98. It was Remedy we've been watching. We've been watching Tomb Raider because of the character, but not because of the gameplay. It was different. Yeah. But we saw that the interaction between characters, that's where the fantasy is happening. So you've been pretty much into the MDA framework, mechanics and dynamics and aesthetics merging in a game. And I think we had the aesthetics pretty early on. The mechanics was obviously a big challenge. As you know, we didn't got the technologies licensable like you have today. You can have Lumberyard or Epic's Unreal, 4, or you can have Unity or whatever great technology. But we haven't got that at the time. So it was a constant fight. It was a fight for realism, also to apply that craziness. That you could go around and basically play whichever way you bloody preferred. You could take a knife and go through the level and became Silent Assassin. And there's one guy on a team, he did that actually, beat the whole game with a knife, and he was brilliant. But this was the one side. It was the neglecting technology difficulties. Just work around it. Just make the engine better than everything else. And this was the genome from the demo scene for some of the developers. And on the other hand, there was this urge to create a character that you really cared about, or at least cared for, So we had long discussions. Are you the character, or are you controlling the character? So there were different discussions and layers of discussions about identification with the lead character. So is it, primary, secondary, or tertiary identification? Which do you want, and what is the most efficient way to express it? We went with a third-person view. It gave the graphics kind of the room it needed. We went for design that is highly replayable. So we thought replayability was a great framework for a character and your fantasy, because in ways you learn about yourself. You can go through and shoot everybody in the face and see how long you get, but you could also go figure it out. You can invent stuff, and people did, seriously. I was amazed how many different ways they found. And even if there were stuff dysfunctional in the game, they just used it. So it became a subject of very deep discussions about game design.
You maybe remember us talking about this. I think maybe in the first episode of the series, the categorizations or the sort of, I forget what you call them, but all the rankings that you get. It's actually a pretty interesting way to think about the game, and you just mentioned it there, where you learn. We talked about this a little bit early on. You learn about yourself, based on what rank you get and what choices you made. And sometimes we both admitted, as you heard us talk about, we would run out of time or we'd get frustrated and we'd just kind of go through and very flippantly say, I just got the mass murderer rank. Because I just wanted to run through. But,
there's not even the verse of them, but yeah.
Well, it's just the simple. It's a simple thing that I mean, you can elaborate on if you have things to add. But the simple thing of having a ranking system and giving names to those ranking systems and meaning and rule sets behind each of them, like you said, actually tells you a lot about how you played that time and if you want to play again. And like you said, I think it's cool that it's like you think about yourself in that decision too. Am I going to spend the time and the effort and the energy to get Silent Assassin because I know it's the hardest thing to do, but in doing so, I know I'm the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right.
And it's about there is a competitive moment of it. Obviously, there's a competitive moment when you commit yourself to go for the Silent Assassin mode.
Yeah,
and you have to clock in quite a lot of hours. Your mom will hate you for it. So it's kind of the thing. But you can also go for Cutthroat or Hitman or Butcher or whatever you would like to prefer. But the just the characterizations, it points at human traits. So this also points at the irony about how humans are and how humans think. Obviously, Ninja Extraordinaire is a very, very funny descriptive of a hitman, and it points back to the guy who actually came up with this mode. He's a programmer, and he's a brilliant programmer. I think he was European champ in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time.
Wow!
And he's a very committed guy, and he came up with this because he would like to be titled Ninja Extraordinaire, So, but then he had to program it, and his colleagues had to program it because these modes also point at the underlying collection of stats. So,
yeah,
so
right.
the way you balance out AI when you have a sandbox game is just insane, and this is what makes these type of games so difficult to balance and make work, because the number of combinations you have between different stats and actions and the game mechanics and what comes up on top as a context is insane. And this is where I love games. Games are in basic reflecting the way the brain works or how humans evolved. I totally believe that play is a major contributor to the best of what humans evolved to. So it's kind of the dopamine loop for you. You have a cognitive challenge, then you use your haptic ability, your ability to maneuver a 16-axis controller, and figure it out. And, in basics game design of these type of games, this is you try to manage this functionality. So you have to jump, or you have to hide, or you have to time movements or actions, or and you do it because you cannot go straight forward. So and this is how humans evolved. We couldn't have survived unless we used our brain and evolved it, and we worked together with each other. These are the two major components, and I believe that the best way to create games is kind of stay with that almost hologram-like way the brain works, and this.
Yeah, and you're playing to adaptation, right? I mean, you put a wall in my way, and I'm going to go around it, or I'm going to climb over it. I'm going to adapt to these obstacles that that the clockwork of Hitman is putting in front of me. Whether that's waiting in a position long enough for a guard to go by, or just scoping out the place, getting a sense of where everybody's going to be when, and keeping that all in my brain so that I can adapt to it on the fly.
I can tell you, it gave us some headache also, because obviously when you have systems going this deep in AI, and then you have to save the game, at any point. I tell you, it's a challenge. So as you know, there wasn't any save function in the first game, and we had this flagged by a number of testers and people playing the game early on before release, and there was no way we could ever get to the point to make the save game work in the first iteration of the game. So we came up with this, there's no save game in real life as an excuse. So this was kind of the mantra at the studio. So we'll be forgiven if the entertainment value is higher than the frustration level. And, it was for 750,000 guys who bought the first game. It didn't got the best reviews, but it got tons of attention, and attention enough to convince Eidos to invest in the next game. The first game was developed in less than 2 years, I guess. We were 23 guys when we finished the game in the studio. So we were 7 when we started. And the cost was like, I don't know, $2 million or something. That was the cost of developing that game.
Yeah.
Obviously a lot of hours clocked in, and a lot of commitment from the dev team.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break here, just to let all that sink in. Great stuff. I'm thinking about QA. I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk about in the second half.
Yeah.
But let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to it. Welcome back to the second half of the podcast. We're talking with Janos Flösser. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with pronunciation. I'm not a native Nordic speaker of any kind. But we were talking a little bit about all these interlocking systems, and it just made me have nightmares of how it must have been to QA this game. Was that mostly on the publisher side, or was it all kind of in-house? How did you all treat that?
So in the very beginning, it was done by the developers themselves, which was obviously entirely stressful because they didn't got the time to do that. We started to hire some of our friends to do that, and then finally got organized around publisher in London, Eidos, who were publishing the game and producing with us. And it became much better at that point. Obviously, a major challenge still. I think some of the QA resource for these type of games need to sit next to the programmers and developers. And then you can have a wider, broader testing going on in a very explicit QA headquarters or something, but it took us some, and as a result and the consequence of that, we decided at IO to have actually build a laboratory for user testing, so user experience and user testing. So it came on top of the quality assurance group. Because it wasn't, some of it was subjective, some of it was based on, yes, the game breaks and there is a bug that makes it dysfunctional. This is a QA issue, it's easy to report. Some of it relies on your experience with the game. It's not necessarily a bug, it's just dysfunctional in terms of perception. And that is a user experience issue. And we wanted to get much deeper into that. So as a result of the complexity, we decided to establish a user research center in Copenhagen. Later on, it was actually brought out to the larger organization. Now it's run mainly from Montreal for Square Enix, but there's also a significant user experience group in Tim's old studio, in Crystal Dynamics, and also at IO Interactive. It helps
that
also.
Was always a big thing for Tim.
Yeah, it helps also, dealing with the time issue. You have these big publishers. We have I don't know how many time zones, but you start 9 hour behind IO in San Francisco. Now you go 8 hour ahead in Tokyo, and we still need to communicate. And having this, more systemic approach to quality assurance and user experience, it helped a lot to improve the games over the years.
Now, was one of the things I'm curious about is I assume it's possible to achieve every ranking in every level.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, I mean, I didn't read them all out. There's easily a dozen, maybe more like 15. And wow, and then what was it? 21 levels, I guess, Tim.
Yeah,
I guess the bookends are maybe not not as important for that, but wow, that's
and I think
astonishing.
I think those rankings were just for Hitman 2 as well, and so each new game adds essentially some more, right? As well as more mechanics, which we definitely, I'm sure Brett and I want to get to the iteration kind of topic later on, but yeah.
Yeah, when we look at the later versions of the game, these insight to stats and also functionality in a game helped us to create some quite innovative features, such as contract modes and stuff. So you could set up something and ask people to beat your stats, and obviously it's very rewarding when you are a hardcore fan of the game. It wouldn't be possible unless you have the underlying data. Obviously, you can choose as many ways to play the game as you have persons playing the game. I don't think I've ever seen levels being played quite the same way, because it's, as we talked about, a pretty open framework. So you have your freedom inside.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to that for a second, and we've touched on it a couple of times, but I don't know if you can elaborate that. Brett and I brought up multiple times in the previous episodes how, and even in my opener when we started in the first episode, because one of the goals that we have for the podcast is to talk about relevance and games influence, the game that we're playing, its influence on other games. And the funny thing about Hitman is that it's actually so unique that it's hard to actually equate it to another game or to find the direct connections of influence one way or the other. Was that a conscious focus and goal for you guys, that you wanted it to be very different from anything out there? And you mentioned Thinking Man Shooter, which I actually, once you said that, I remember you'd mentioned it before.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten about that. And then Noah Hughes, a good friend of ours that I mentioned earlier in the episodes, would always, use the term murder puzzle or and Brett often mentions clockwork, I think, is another good way to think about the levels. But can you talk about that some?
Yeah. So obviously you have a certain frame and you have some objectives, because you cannot just, be in limbo and thrown into something. You need to have some objectives. But from that point and ongoing, you are absolutely in your total freedom to elaborate and try out different stuff. And I don't mind dying in a game as long as it's fun and it feels still rewarding because you had fun with it, right? So one thing is that you die and it feels like a punishment because you think you're doing the logical stuff and you shouldn't die. But if you go face to face with 5 guards and they all have machine guns and you have your hardball, you're most likely to go down, and that before you start, you will try and test it anyway. So it's worth your effort, kind of. I see it as you input your time and money to this game, and you have to have certain functionality to be on a level where you can manage the game, but mainly you have to have your emotional kickback, So you have to have this emotionality. You're succeeding with something. You planned it and you succeeded with it. You figured it out. You outsmarted the AI or the system or the guards, or you found some new ways to do it, or you found some new rooms or new objects, new weapons, whatever. And it feels super rewarding. And this goes back to your talk about. I mean, it does connect, to the MDA framework kind of. You have a different type of successes or success criteria. I think they work with a couple of sensation, fantasy, and narrative and stuff, and all that. You can argue for all that in a game. It was a very, very deliberate choice to make it as open world as possible. At some point, we had to redesign the engine basically because we couldn't carry the increased calculations in the old engine. But we wanted to. At that point, we introduced kind of a more gated approach from one level to another, but inside the gates, you still had a very, very open world game.
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate the ability to go back. You sort of have in Hitman 2, you have that hub level, at the monastery, where you can just go and replay earlier levels. I having played a bunch of it in the second episode, I think I had gone back and played Anathema, the very sort of first actual hit, in order to try to understand how to get the Silent Assassin rating, like just what was involved, and like to kind of give myself a framework moving forward, like what is it going to take to be that good, to understand it. And had I been, games these days don't often do that. I mean, it kind of breaks the idea of a reality, right? That you're at a point in time. Although Uncharted, I think, also does this, that you can just kind of go back at any time and play earlier levels. Although I don't think most people wouldn't play it that way. But yeah, I mean, I love that it's exposing it as a game. Like these are challenges that you're trying to overcome, and it's very forward with that to say, look, we're expecting you to come in and put yourself to the test. Right? I mean, that's what it's all about. And one of those design decisions is that ability to go back and just like replay at any point. It doesn't affect how you move forward. So it does kind of have the open worlds in themselves, but they're like little pearls, right, on a string.
Absolutely, and you look at the latest release, and look at the Paris Fashion Show. I'm not sure if you had the chance to play it.
I played it.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the experience for a lot of guys who haven't played it yet. But I tell you, I've been playing that for I don't know how many hours, also during development. And I've been laughing and laughing and laughing. I think it's so hilarious and so funny, so I can't even, describe it for you. I really enjoyed replaying the game. It has a great replayability and also feels totally rewarding when you do that. So I like that. I don't know. Sometimes I try to define what makes things succeed and make comparisons. And it's like when you're reading a book, you have to, the book is good if you keep turning the pages. The moment you stop turning the page, the book is dead, and the same thing with games for me. I don't think it's a good game if people play 20% and then leave the game, and even if they had fun with the 20%, but don't bother about the rest of the game, it will eat me, I would like people to play my games and keep playing them and conclude it, to get the narrative, to get the experience, get it under the skin, think about it, enjoy the ingenuity put into it and the work put into it. I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I think is a hallmark is that, like Tim had said at different points, while we were playing, is that you have this feeling like if you can think of a thing to do, then you can experiment with that thing. That there is so many avenues of possibility that you're kind of unfolding over time, that was kind of a hint to me as well. Go ahead, Tim. You were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just gonna talk a little bit more about sort of like that replayability, and one of the things that I love about this franchise, and I knew would make it a good one for podcast format. And Rebel FM, which is another podcast that I listen to, they also did a game club kind of thing on Blood Money. And it's just that water cooler talk of it. Even just like you said, Janos, even when you play it by yourself multiple times, you have that water cooler conversation where you're laughing or you're just giddy about how something, came out. And then for us to talk about it on the podcast, I just knew it would be interesting because, like you said, every playthrough is going to be different, and the mechanics and all of the different dynamics that are happening together are always going to create interesting stories, even though it's not necessarily part of the narrative. And Brett and I think one of the fun, the most fun things about the podcast for me has been coming to each episode and learning how each other did that particular, series of levels, because it wasn't always the same.
No, and sometimes it ended up pretty bizarre also. I recall images where I've been, phoned by angry parents and say, how can you create a game like that? This is, wow. It destroys civilization, and I don't know what, because people were posting images like on the thermal bath hotel, there was one guy who basically killed everybody on the level and dragged them into this big, pool of water. And then they've been all the characters were floating in a swimming pool. And I said, okay, that wasn't my intention with the game, basically. Or when Father Vittorio was actually nailed to a church door with a nail gun, I had a very bad day, because it wasn't my intention to do that. But I guess when you give people the freedom to experiment, they're going all the way. They do the extra mile to do something spectacular. And in many ways, you can laugh about it. I don't think it makes people worse. I think it's just, more provocative than you expect. And I think the provocation in itself doesn't justify the action, but the provocation, on the other hand, points towards artistic freedom, because this is what great contemporary art will do for you. It will mock your civilization, and it will point back to you, and it will be very provocative. And at the best, I think games does that.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's something that we tried to achieve with the Skyrim, and the Fallout games. It's very much a part of what that was all about, is give these people an enormous canvas and a handful of paints, and sometimes you're going to get the Sistine Chapel, and sometimes it's going to look like something your kid did.
Exactly.
It's a very wide, as many different humans as we have. You'll have different responses.
Well, so many. I was just going to add that, as I was talking about earlier, there's so many genres that are so specific in what verbs they give you to interact with, and they limit that. And the freedom of expression, the band of that freedom of expression is pretty small and narrow. And you guys just put all of these verbs together into a world, and like you said, kind of full circle to something you were saying earlier on, and that I really picked up on, is the game is going to tell you a lot about yourself based on what you're going to do with it, and the Silent Assassin, it's an interesting sort of rank for you guys to put on a pedestal and make kind of the ultimate expression of perfection for the game, because it's the kind of the slickest way and the less, has the least impact on the world by doing that one, versus you could have put Mass Murderer on a pedestal, right, and said that's the highest rank you can get, and we're gonna balance and tune around that goal. But instead, you flipped it, and so I can kill everyone and drag their bodies into a pool, but that's my choice, and this is the canvas, as Brett was saying, that I've been given. And whether you're, as a player, cognizant of that self-reflection or not, once you do that and take a step back and say, wow, why did I do that? Doesn't necessarily matter, but the fact that you can, there aren't, even in some of the open world games these days, they're still genreified, and they still have boundaries that put them into a certain bucket, and even though I can go anywhere I want to, the verb set is still not as rich as I would like it to be. And so,
right, a Far Cry is a perfect example.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. We've been doing over the years. We've been doing a lot of research and development to facilitate that freedom. The games had very early on enormously high ambition about AI, the sandbox itself, the character expression, physics and dynamics. I think we were one of the very few games with, cloth, foliage, ragdolls first out in any game, I think. We even had, this is funny because we even had the slow motion option, Matrix mode, slow motion shooting. We didn't call it bullet time. I realized very painfully Max Payne did when they came out. They used it as a feature carrying the whole game, actually. We underplayed it quite a lot in the first game. We had the feature, actually. But the whole thing, the physics, I mean, Rasmus said, guys, and he said it to programmers, and Rasmus was the art director of the project. He said, I gave him this red tie, it's a marker. It's very significant. It's almost like, it goes almost like semantic marker, it goes to your stomach. And if you cannot make it move, it's just going to be glued on him. It would be ridiculous. Can you do some cloth algorithms? And then one of the great developers on the team, Thomas Jacobson, he thought about, he's a mathematician, and he was thinking quite a lot, and then he developed this very early physics system. Ended up with the ragdolls and the foliage and everything. We had, I think, 15,000 objects with cloth algorithms on it on the first game. So it was pretty unique. We had the mirror. Nobody did mirrors in games.
Yeah.
The mirror.
Yeah, that was very unusual.
Yeah, we used that for gameplay. We had the fish tank, and we shoot it, and the water was pouring out, and all that stuff. I mean, there was kind of craziness, not just to show off, but to create this, vibrant or more vibrant environment. Looking back to it now, it's some years ago, but it still feels like an achievement, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, technically, that was something that I picked up on right away playing it, was that it was, it was probably one of the first games, with real-time shadows from multiple light sources. There was a lot going on, and it was also fully, everything was fully simulated. A lot of games, if you can't see a person, they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
They're just waiting for you to show up, right? They're on their own stages, and until you're there, nothing's moving on the stage. But here, that was, I imagine the processing must have been pretty overwhelming.
It was.
But coming from the demo scene and squeezing something out of every cycle, totally makes sense to me. Like that would be where your engineers came from.
And they didn't let it go ever since. We had the Mardi Gras Carnival, in Blood Money. That was a big crowd scene. So we've been working on these things. The same went for the audio. We really wanted to create something extraordinary. So we went to Hungary to record a symphony orchestra for this game, the full score. I have background in music recording, so I was actually producing it together with Jesper Kuhl. You call him Jesper Kid, but his name is Jesper Kuhl. He lives in Los Angeles now. He's a brilliant composer, and he did the music. He had one of his friends, Pierre Földes, actually doing the arrangement for him. And we went to Budapest and hired a full symphony orchestra. I think they were like a big late romantic orchestra, like 98 guys.
Wow.
They played.
Yeah, you can hear it. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah,
I mean, the game.
it is absolutely.
The music holds up really, really well.
Well, and this was Jesper's. This was his first big series, right? I mean, he's gone on. He's had a great career since the Hitman stuff with Assassin's Creed and many other things, right?
Absolutely. We got a BAFTA for this one on the music.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you? So one of the, as you heard from the previous episodes, one of the big themes that we talked a lot about was the iteration, and kind of I guess for lack of a better term, the rarity of this kind of iteration on a franchise within one studio for so many years and so many titles. How did you guys? Can you tell? Kind of just share some of the backstory there and maybe even some of the trials and tribulations of carrying a franchise for this many, versions, and then maybe some anecdotes and such about some of the things that you did add over time to iterate and to kind of keep improving, and adding more. Because now when you play the new one that just came out, for me at least, who loves the series and have played all of them throughout the years, you can kind of see the DNA from the beginning, kind of, and each iteration, what has ended up in this one. And I think it's interesting. You mentioned, as an aside, earlier you mentioned how one of your goals for the first one was having a sense of episodic within the game, where each level was its self-sufficient kind of mini story. And now ultimately the new one's coming out episodically, even from a business model perspective, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, iteration, yeah.
Yeah. So the iteration is, it's story-wise, it's when you have a character as iconic as him, that it's a less challenge writing up new episodes. The real challenge lies in staying in character. And you can see this is what missing in the movies, if you ask me, But in a game, I think we actually managed to stay with the character and even improve not only his appearance but also the psychology around the character, and also when you have, if you start to move him towards too emotional, at some point he'll probably make a full stop and ask himself, what am I doing? He's not going to do that, because then the character is dead. So what you can expand is actually the world around him. And as I told you, it seems to me that the slightly sci-fi component, reality is catching up on the sci-fi. It's no longer as sci-fi as it is. So in many ways, it's been totally a treat to have a character like him to work with. You pick the most exotic locations. You pick the people who you would think important to take out of the gene pool, so to speak. So these are seriously the all the bad types, the gun runners and drug dealers and corrupt politicians and whatnot. And there's a lot of them. And our way to deal with them is do it intelligently. This
is sorry to interrupt, but this is an undercurrent that you and I had never talked about, that I didn't realize that the games were actually this alternate way for you to deal with the world's criminals in your.
You like that. I mean, you just like that. People had it coming. They asked for it almost, and I think the one thing that is so important to me, it's kind of have this distance or self-irony to the character all the way. There's a certain scene when Hitman actually going on a catwalk, or you can make him go on a catwalk in the new game on a Paris fashion show, and this is the ultimate, most ridiculous scene you've seen, I mean, but it's really rewarding when you watch it, and then you can elaborate from there, and you can basically interact with the entire world. So the idea was to make this real world sim, but frame it in a super absurd, context, and let you try your fantasies, let you try, figure it out, be smart about it. And play the game and keep playing the game. So the iteration was at some point staggered by the technology and the leap forward of technologies. We have all the technologies going exponential. I don't see the game industry being a exponential, or at least it is an exponential industry, but it's not a disruptive industry. The game industry, opposite other industries, in my optics, it's been a transformational industry. It's a digital native industry. It was born digital. So we've been just good at exploiting technologies, but obviously it takes you a lot to create a new engine, and this is what we decided. So here you have one of my biggest probably mistakes, I'm not sure, about being managing director. At some point, we had to create a new Hitman game, and I asked all the programmers, the best of them, to come to my office, and we've been discussing technology. They've been telling me, you cannot do a new Hitman game competitive on the old engine, on the Glacier 1 engine. And I said, okay, so what is the damage? What are we looking at? And they said, we have to have a new engine. And I asked the guys, how long do you think it will take to program it? And then they said, it will take 12 months before you have a beta version of it. And I said, okay, 12 months is a long time, but okay, 12 months is something we can survive. There was one guy, Hakon Steiner, now he's working on Heroes and Generals, brilliant programmer. He said, you guys, you must be out of your mind. This will take you minimum 24 months. Now, in reality, it took us 6 years. So there was a big hole in the production pipeline, and this almost killed the studio, to be honest. But we came up with a brilliant engine, and it's fully functional and one of the best engines you can work on today. But this was the most frustrating ever thing in my life, sitting with all these super intelligent guys, and they weren't able to predict, what it takes to create the next gen technology. And this is the truth about the industry. And if you really commit yourself to it, you're going to face these challenges. And fortunately, we survived, but it was barely.
Yeah, that's tough. A similar thing, I think, happened at Bethesda over Oblivion, making the leap to that sort of next generation. I guess that would have been Xbox 360 kind of technology. Was a big step for them, and it was. I wasn't there then, but it was. I hear similar horror stories about making that transitional jump.
Well, it's happened. I feel like every studio I've ever worked in, has that conversation. Yeah. Crystal as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are any features that you didn't put in, that you put effort into, but you decided didn't fit with the character. You were talking. It's a really interesting way to frame it. Is that you have to maintain coherence with the character and not make that silly. So were there any approaches you took that you ended up killing off because it didn't fit the character?
So, we've been, there's a lot of features we killed off. There was one thing we killed off very early on. Unfortunately, it came back at some point. But, there was one feature when we were talking about what will make Hitman in Silent Assassin move back to operation. He went to Sicily. He wanted to get off the grid, which he succeeded to a certain extent. Now someone wants him back in action. What should they do to motivate him to get back to the trade? And Rasmus made some very early images, where gangsters coming in, chasing Hitman. It's a car chase. It's a cut scene. You have to envision a cut scene. And then they cut in front of a bus full of nuns, and the bus goes down the cliff, and all the nuns got killed. And and there was a scene. It was brilliant. I actually think I still have the storyboard for it. And, we had this discussion with the publisher, and they said, you know what? No nuns. So, and then we got the, that very controversial trailer out, where Hitman is attacked by a bunch of nuns in latex, you remember that?
For Absolution,
Yeah, so early on we had this, you don't punch women in the face, you don't shoot at kids, and you don't have nuns in the game. So these things were kind of part of it. I still wonder, what is the extent of stuff you can allow yourself in any game. In reality, you have, I don't know, maybe more than 120,000 kid soldiers in Africa, right? These guys are 12, 10, 13. The most infamous thing humans ever did, brutalize kids. My take is it should never find its way to computer games. So obviously we have a moral obligation not to, expose these things. I don't know how to say. I've been working with kids television at some point, and we had this agreement in the group that we could basically treat any subject and expose kids in distress on screen, but we shouldn't ever leave kids in front of the screen in distress. So this was kind of. So there's a certain level of morality. You don't want to go beyond that threshold. But I think other than that, not really.
Well, I think to that point, to Brett's question, we talked about it a few times, and you mentioned the nuns example for the Absolution trailer. It always felt like you guys, and I don't know, maybe this was Rasmus specifically, because I remember him being that kind of guy, just like pretty edgy fellow and really, really fun guy. But it felt like controversy was, I don't know if it was necessarily an intentional kind of, goal or pillar for you guys, but every game had this edginess to it and this sense of controversy for whatever reason. And I'm sure it was usually unexpected what people would get upset about. Maybe the nuns were something you could have seen coming, but if you go through the history of even the ad campaigns and stuff, there's usually something that rubs people the wrong way. And was that an intentional thing, or was that just part of the character or part of the setting of things, or was it you guys? Was it the way, the kind of in the DNA of the studio?
We had this campaign at some point called Beautifully Executed. And it was a long list of gorgeously created images with a very dark motif, and I think it worked extremely well. And it worked within the limits of my understanding of what you can do in computer games, absolutely. And it was absolutely reflecting how the studio were thinking about these things, and also the bit of the edginess, not too much of it, but enough to get the attention and also, challenge you when you play the game. So I remember this discussion we had once in the studio, and as you said, Rasmus is a very, very funny guy. He has a lot of humor, and he's kind of, hitting it every time. So we had this discussion about morality and what can you do, what you cannot do, what if you were invisible. And his instant reply to that was, he said, I think something like, if I was invisible, I don't know if I will rob a bank or I will have a peek at the ladies' dressing room. So, we had discussions like that, because you had to be provocative. You had to have, you have to challenge yourself. You have to challenge your own norms and predictions, and also, what is in line with entertainment, what is out of line with entertainment. Yeah. And I think you look at movies today, I mean, they go way beyond games, way beyond. You look at reality, it's just insane. I mean, look at it would be even totally wrong to compare, because games are games, and you look at, I don't know, the political scenario around the world, people suffering really badly. I mean, it's, and we have it every evening. You have it in newspapers, you have it in television, you have it all over the place.
Yeah, it's a matter of perspective, right? And
totally,
it is so interesting that especially our industry being such a young industry in the grand scheme of things, and what becomes controversy for us it seems so out of context for the rest of the world sometimes, and kind of absurd in a lot of ways.
Yeah. What I need is innovation. What I need in the game industry now, it's the boldness it had once, to go and try out stuff, not for the profit of it, not for speculation, not for a Me Too project, but a totally new and fresh take on something. I would love to do a game about love. I would love to do a game about some stuff that not really, in line with your expectation towards what a game should do for you. I look very much forward to virtual reality. What can it do for me in a game? I look very much forward to interface challenges. How can you introduce a new interface to me? I look very much forward to the point where you have enough consolidation broad enough so there would be space for smaller companies to make their mark also.
Yeah, and I think the good news is that's starting to happen, right? I mean, I feel like every year more and more of those small things are, and some of them catch on and become bigger things. But it is an exciting time, and I'm kind of glad. As much as I'm bummed you're not directly at IO or working at Square anymore. It sounds like it's really interesting that you're helping fund, that kind of stuff, and actually allowing opportunities for people to actually do games about love and things like that. So, but anyway, you're close.
Well, I think that's a great place to end up.
Yep.
Looking forward and thinking about the future. So, thank you for that. That was a really great conversation, Janos. I'm so glad we got to have you on, and I got a chance to meet you.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Your baby. It was
yes, thank you so much. It was so great to have you on, and I'm sure the listeners are going to love hearing all of your your stuff based on the franchise and your insight into the industry. So it's been great to catch up, Janos.
Thank you very much. The same, Tim.
Well, I'm back. Tim's back. That was a really fascinating conversation with Janos, who I hadn't met before. What a trip! I really enjoyed having a chance to pick his brain. There were definitely some directions I didn't expect that conversation to go. Even just like starting out where the game started. It started with the character. Amazing.
Yeah, those were good for me too, because as many hours of conversations as I've had with Janos, we never really got into this stuff for the backstory and all that. So that was really fascinating for me too, being a fan. And I knew he'd be a good guest to have on because he's such a deep thinker about all sorts of things, just life in general. And he's just a really good guy. So it was really nice to have him on and give him a soapbox to kind of pontificate about things.
Yeah, about who had it coming.
Yeah. His quotes are always classic and just super insightful.
I'm going to have a fun time writing up the show notes for this one, I'm sure. Well, in terms of business, I just want to make sure that we called out what we're playing next and reinforce that with folks. I don't know if you've started Final Fantasy IX yet, Tim. I've played a little bit, maybe an hour or two.
No, I haven't started yet. I'm
okay.
Still. I have to admit, I'm still intimidated, but I will jump in.
Get to it. You got a week.
I know.
But yeah, that hopefully people will get into it and enjoy it. I've already picked out how I want to start talking about it next week, because getting back into it after years and years since I played it, it's all coming back kind of all at once. What I really loved about it.
Good.
So. Yeah, that conversation will be really interesting. I haven't actually gone deep enough that there's been a lot of like combat yet, which is I think one of the things that Final Fantasy games in general get. JRPGs really in general, not even just the Final Fantasy series. They tend to have a lot of grinding, or just a lot of random battles and things like that. And I'm curious because I don't remember to what degree that is true of this game. So it's going to be interesting for me too, revisiting it. But yeah,
well, it should make for a good conversation then.
It should. So in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville, and Tim, you're at
Tim Longo Jr.
Yeah. The podcast has its own Twitter feed, mostly just posting when the episodes are out and things like that at DevGameClub. You can also reach us at DevGameClub on gmail.com and at DevGameClub.com. We'd love to have more reviews from folks on iTunes. That's really great. I gather that helps them rank podcasts when people go looking for stuff. So it'd be a great way for us to reach more listeners. And if you have email or comments, by all means, send them in. We'd love to read that stuff on future episodes.
Absolutely.
So, all right, sir. Thanks very much. I'm so glad that you got Janos on. We're keeping a very high bar for our guests. And
I don't know what we're going to do for Final Fantasy. This is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I have thoughts. I'm gonna start working on that now that we're getting into it.
Awesome.
So yeah, should be good. We shall see how that goes. But in the meantime, thanks very much for playing, and we'll talk to you next time.